All right, everybody, welcome, welcome. Uh, if you're like, who is this guy who's so loud on the call? My name is Jonathan Troy. I am the head of community here at Codecademy. Again, please let us know in the chat the city and country that you're logging in from, as well as what you want to learn today. Today, I'm lucky to be joined by Alexandra Hjert, who currently serves as an engineer at Squarespace. A bit about her: she currently works in the database team, as well as leads an internal boot camp to help teach her colleagues about coding. She's used Codecademy in the past, starting in 2013, and has been at Squarespace for 11 years. She's going to talk about her journey, give some tips, and she has a little deck for us to provide some visuals. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. However, we do have time at the end to go over any questions you may have. But if it's super pressing, I do my best to ask Alexandra. Lastly, we'll be uploading this video to YouTube. So if you're like, oh my gosh, so much information, do the video recording, which I know many of you will ask, you can always rewatch it on YouTube, and we should have it up within a few days. So I will stop talking and pass it off to Alexandra. Alexandra, welcome.
Hi,
Hmm.
my name's Alex. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, how I moved up at Squarespace, and what helped me get into an engineering role. Um, Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I think so. And yeah, as Jonathan mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit and then we have an AMA at the end so you guys can ask a bunch of questions. So, a little bit about me. I used to work in retail and service jobs just like most everyone, I feel, at least when you get into the job industry. I was almost pretty much getting into retail management for a while. And while I worked my retail jobs, I was getting a degree in geography and film, my undergraduate. And I had really hoped to kind of get a degree to do GIS and remote sensing, and possibly in tandem with that, since it didn't make as much money, as doing independent films. And as I worked towards those degrees, I learned a lot of different types of programs in the process, like ArcGIS, Final Cut Pro, Aperture, stuff like that, with my film degree. And as I was doing those, as I finished that degree, I spent a good 4 years, I think, um, pretty much trying to break into the government agency jobs of any sort. Transit, wastewater management, forestry, you name it. I was trying to do that. I did that through, any way I could, applying to volunteer jobs, nonprofits, going canvassing door to door. And that's where I kind of started. And after about 4 years, I was kind of hitting a wall. I wasn't really getting anywhere into any of these jobs. They're pretty limited if you know the industry. And so at a certain point, um, I realized that I needed to kind of pivot what I was doing and try and uh, break into some other industry after 4 years. And with those types of programs that I was learning throughout my retail experience, actually, as well as my degree, um, I started looking more at those types of tools. And I used to build GeoCities websites, if you guys are familiar, back in like 2003. And I had a friend who, at the same time, contacted me that lived in New York. We knew from high school. And she told me that she worked at Squarespace at the time and they were possibly going to open a office in Oregon or Washington. And so they ended up opening one in Oregon. I ended up applying. And I want to just take a moment and address that a lot of my skills at this point throughout my career was customer service. And so I applied to a customer service role and I got in. And one of the huge pinpoints I'm going to bring up throughout this presentation is while I think there's like some statistic I read, it's about you have like an 80+% chance of getting a job if you have a referral. And so I did have a referral. It was word of mouth at the time. And so it wasn't exactly like the most streamlined process. Squarespace was really, really small at the time. And it was about maybe a couple hundred people. There's like 30 engineers, it wasn't very big. And this was before I knew I wanted to become an engineer. And I joined the company. And next slide, please. I got into Squarespace by applying into customer service, and that was all grand and dandy. I was really, really excited to get out of just the retail place. And from there, I think a lot of this information I'm going to go over isn't exactly quite new, but it's really important. And I think it draws a lot of conclusions at the end for you guys. Um, so while I was at Squarespace, I first became an advisor. I pretty much answered emails most of the time, and I did that for about 3 weeks. I had at this point in my time of life had already managed several different teams and was into management. And I really didn't want to be kind of at the base level role. So I worked really, really hard in the first month at this new office in Portland that just opened. And so with that, with these smaller tech companies, the benefit is there's so many different roles you can kind of fill. You can fill in these problems and gaps that need to be answered. Um, like, um, sorry, can you hear my, um, there's roles that you can fill, like, if you see a problem, sorry, I heard something in the background very loud. Um, if you see a problem such as like within the product at Squarespace, I quickly became an expert in the product, which was a shift lead. And within that time frame, I answered a bunch of questions and became an expert in the product. Like tough questions like DNS, um, and this allowed me to answer more escalated and advanced issues and eventually work with engineers side by side on outages. And that was really, really cool. I actually didn't know at the time that I wanted to work in engineers or anything. And working on the platform at Squarespace allowed me to manage these high-end issues. And some of the gaps I needed to fill, I'm sorry about that. Some of the gaps I needed to fill was workforce solutions. I found some gaps in scheduling. We didn't have a scheduling team at Squarespace. And at the time, it was so small that I sorry, got a little nervous there. Uh, I've done this a few times, but
You're doing great. You're doing great.
thank you guys. Sorry. Um, there was a bunch of gaps to fill, and one of those things was to ask more questions, ask the opportunities, find the problems, find the solutions, build the metrics. And one of the jobs I had done, thanks, Dennis. One of the jobs I had done was when you work at a new company, one of the benefits is like there's no roles to fill and there's a lot of hats to grasp. They didn't have a scheduling department, and I started doing forecasting in a spreadsheet on my own. I there was a day where we would all be in the email queue, and it was a bank holiday or something, and no customers were coming in. And that's when I started just building the schedule and making the role. And from that role, sorry to trip over myself so much, I started doing more Excel spreadsheets and just doing that type of job and filling those gaps. From there, um, I started, once I kind of built out that team a little bit more, then I started doing a more managing of the tools for uh, live chat and email. Um, and that led to me being able to manage the actual help center at Squarespace through JavaScript. And so I had these opportunities of these building blocks to do that by filling in gaps and showing my worth and asking more questions, asking for the opportunity, like asking my managers, like, can I do more? Here's a problem. Here's a solution. Can I find that? And I just kept learning. We're going to move on now that I can actually hear you guys a little bit better. All right. So one of the big things that we learn that is not talked about at a lot of the boot camps I've been through is mindset and mental health and how this applies into your everyday. So I'm going to just quickly go over this a little bit. Next slide. So when I was learning how to code, I first went through all these different roles and it kind of led me to this career path of like learning Excel and gaining new skill sets. And then from there, I worked on some outages side by side with engineers. And I realized at that moment that this was where I wanted to learn how to code. And so in my free time, I started taking any class and every class I could. And I had a lot of expectations. I'd seen people and heard some things, and this was back in 2013 when there wasn't quite as much information on the web. Um, there wasn't many boot camps. Codecademy had just opened, I think. And um, so I ended up doing a program through Treehouse, and I started really small. And I had all these expectations in my head of like code in a year. I would be able to become an engineer in about a year. Um, I had this mentality of understanding everything. If I didn't understand it, then I would stay stuck in that spot when I was learning to code. Like, especially in those fundamentals, like what's under the hood? Am I really understanding this? And that these weren't the best expectations, and that's going to come into the next slide. Another thing I kept on kind of doing in those first 2 years of learning how to code was like powering through and just trying to force my way into understanding everything. Um, I also used to take a bunch of notes, and I also was very self-sufficient. I was like, I can do this, I can handle this, I can do this by myself. And that perpetuated quite a bit. And since there wasn't as much information on the web at that point, it's what really like hindered my growth. So the real expectations that I want to like push here would be to keep learning. One of the things that helped me succeed and to get further in my career was I kept trying different avenues. If one class wasn't fitting me, like I first tried JavaScript and that wasn't quite sitting well, I went over to Python and that started to do better for me. I tried different mediums. I tried reading different books in tandem to taking different classes, taking different videos. Um, One of my favorites was actually a PDF through learning, which was very just like one example based at a time. Um, and yeah, so like learning different mediums is really big. One of my expectations was that I would be writing a ton of code all the time, and reading code is probably one of the most fundamental things to do and what you're going to be doing at most of your jobs. So paying more attention to that as well. A big one is if you're like looking at your code and you're sitting there and you're like, I am so frustrated. I'm not getting this, like having a self-doubt spin out, you should have left your computer about 10 minutes earlier. That is one of the biggest things of like taking breaks is not a bad thing. Going on a walk, those are absolutely necessary when you're learning code because it is a very hard process to learn code. And I'm going to go into that in another slide in a minute. But another last three little things was like writing more comments when I code and how helpful that is. I know that's in a lot of the trainings, but I can't emphasize enough how future you will be thankful for having comments. Um, and then instead of that self-sufficient, like I'm doing this and I don't really need to reach out and kind of staying stuck perpetually, like finding reasons to be doing this yourself and by yourself. You know, you guys are at Codecademy. We're looking at community, man. You need to be asking questions. And if you don't find like a Slack room or whatever is out there or Reddit or have you, like this is a great place to start. But finding some community that fits you, keep trying different things. And then the condition yourself bit is just very small tidbit that I found really helpful for myself is I made a playlist out of music that was like ambient music, and then I never changed that playlist. Like it was a very long playlist, and I pretty much conditioned myself whenever I would listen to that playlist to code, and it would help me get into that moment to code, which I found really hard. Like working out, like getting into the gym is very different than trying to do it at home. and set up that environment. So that was like a small, I feel like productivity win.
Alex,
Next slide.
I know we prefer to have questions at the end, but do you still have this playlist, and would you be able to share out this coding playlist to the rest of the?
Yeah, I could. It's on Spotify. That's fine.
Okay, okay, gotcha, cool.
Again, programming is hard. I don't think this is talked enough about in most boot camps. And since I run a boot camp, I think that I'm just going to go in a little bit more into this, and then we're going to have some tips in the middle, at the very end of this. So next slide. Um, Keep reevaluating yourself as you go through your growth process. Um, I think there's that self-doubt. I can't emphasize enough that every beginner I work with, I've been doing this internal boot camp at Squarespace where I teach people from custops how to code because I really believe in this teaching others how to code mentality that it doesn't necessarily always have to be just a degree that you get that gets you into these positions. I'm really big proponent of that. And a lot of the people who taught me who did and did not have CS degrees believe that as well. But take check-ins with yourself. Know your personal values. Like, why are you doing this? Are you really family oriented? Like, asking those bigger questions really does come down to your day to day. Um, Again, I can't emphasize taking breaks enough. Um, I don't know if I would have survived learning to code if I didn't do that more. One of the other big sticking points I have to bring up is if you're uncomfortable, you are growing. And it's not like when if you're looking at science or a dance routine, you're not going to just know how to dance very quickly. You need to go you need to learn one step at a time, one movement at a time, and then add another movement and keep creating that until you have a dance routine. And that's very, very similar to coding. Um, you're not going to know everything under the hood. That's not one of the biggest problems I had in my early career was trying to figure out everything. I'm like, oh, if I don't understand like, how a function works under the hood, like really deeply with like a print command or something, like don't get hung up on the details, like keep learning. Move past that and keep keep trying to just move forward is a better method. Um, Fail often. Like I think that's not news or new information for anyone to fail. And learning through code by like having your program not work is success. Like you are learning something in that moment, problem solving every day, especially when it comes to your computer setup. If you feel like you're stuck on Git or your terminal's not working or you've moved a directory or installing or uninstalling a program or a virtual environment, those are all like extremely valuable skills that you're going to be doing in your day-to-day job every day that every engineer gets stuck on. Staff engineers, principal engineers, they spend hours doing that type of stuff. So it is valuable. And that mentality of like, I'm not understanding this. I'm so bad at this. That self-doubt again. Um, Try and rephrase that to like, I'm getting better. Again, I think this is reflective of my own experience teaching students over the past 8 years. So this may not apply to you, but from my experience, it has applied to almost all of my classes. Last but not least, ask for help again. And then we're going to go into the next slide. So I think one of the last things we can cover that I think interests most people in these types of talks are interview tips. Like, how do you get the job? What do I do? A lot of that before was like growth, and I wanted to give some real live examples of my own experience. Tripped up my kids were screaming very loudly, so sorry. Um, Interview tips. How can I put this? The biggest thing you can, the biggest difference that between you and someone else is going to be your personality. It's always going to come down to that when it comes to interviews. I've interviewed a lot of people, and your personality is like one of the best home runs you can have. Like, be yourself, be calm. I think I really nailed that first Squarespace interview well. only because I was really solid at my current job and I was moving in management and I felt comfortable and I was very calm in that interview. And I'll tell you, in all the interviews that I've like gave to other people, when you are much calmer and collective and taking your time, that's extremely noticeable. And not in a bad way, like don't like fret over it. Like interviews are hard, you got to practice. But just being confident in yourself and taking that time, um, and using your personality, like slide into the skid of who you are. There's not one path. I think that's a really big take home for me and a lot of the people I've helped and in my own path is it's not just applying to an engineering role. It, take all your skill sets you've learned. Like I used stuff that I learned from school, my retail experience with management and stuff like that. And then I applied to customer operations. And that is a very key way to get into these types of roles. Like it could be a banking role, and then you transition to a different department. It could be a customer operations role where you transition to a department. Sometimes getting into the company you want is the hardship. And then transitioning over is another pathway that's not talked about a lot. Take the leap. I know so many people who don't apply to the job. And this kind of coincides with the mock interviews, but like if you should try and plan to apply to jobs as interview practice. And I feel like that's more of a common thing that people can find online if you're like looking for interview tips. It's like apply to jobs, get the interviews, and make sure you apply to jobs that you're like, I'm not really sure if I want this job, but the interview practice would be very helpful. Um, Mentors and advocates. If you don't have a mentor or an advocate, find one. Like ask people from different companies through LinkedIn, go to meetups, go to job fairs, go to whatever they're called, conferences, like tech conferences. There's little ones run by small companies locally everywhere. I couldn't believe how many I went for just women specific ones, which was really helpful for me. Um, to much bigger ones like the Grace Hopper conference or other conferences, like they can be very siloed. It's great ways to connect and just kind of get more out there and meet people, get your name out there. I know not everyone likes doing that, but it's a really good method just to at least get to know people if you don't have a small community. And be your own advocate. Like if you're in a position where you want to ask your manager to like get more time to code or do something more technical or more data driven at your job, like ask, keep asking. Um, Being your own advocate, I think, is what drives the difference between most people who actually get promoted or actually get these jobs. Um, Mock interviews, I definitely think people should be doing like fake interviews with like their friends or something. Anything like that is very, very helpful. And then there's the back pocket stories where it's like have some, like a good experience, a bad experience, uh whatever your like current career is, like apply it to those and like how did you make something different or how did you turn something around with like an employee or a manager or customer, like how did you turn it around? There's some of those that I think everyone can find online. And then the last three or the last two are really, really focused on, or actually, sorry, the last three are really focused on more technically. Like if you're applying for the technical interview, um, apply when you start applying to companies, and some of them give these packages that tell you what they're looking for when they for the like the testing part of the code examples and stuff like that. And it's all generally leak code that's set up by Google, kind of adopted by a bunch of other teams and other companies. So definitely look up leak code and common ones, and we can talk about more like specifics if necessary. But there's a lot of leak code, which is mostly algorithm based, and they're really small problems that you can like practice day to day, and they are pretty hard. And it's not my favorite, but it's how the industry standard is. So getting familiar with leak code is really valuable. And then building things like build small servers, build a your own adventure game. Build small games. Just build small things and keep moving forward. That's very, very helpful to not get stuck or stopped. And then the last thing about interview tips is be honest. Be honest with where you at, like technically, or what you've actually built or how you helped build something, not like owning something that you and a team built. Um, yeah, because that sticks out very, very obviously in interviews that I've done. So those are a few of my tips. Um, I do want to open it up for questions. Sorry, I had to talk at you for a minute. I don't always love doing that, so I'm happy to hear some questions from y'all and what you guys might be thinking. So I think we have a few questions coming up.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, first off, thank you, Alex, for taking the time to put together the deck and providing an overview of the things that you have like learned on your journey and what you currently do. Our first question is from Cameron, and by the way, if y'all could put your questions in the chat, I can ask directly, or if you feel the very strong need to, more than happy to allow you to turn on your camera and ask the question directly to Alex. But Cameron asks, and by the way, Cameron, let us know where you're zooming in from. But the rise of AI, do companies still use leak code to do interviews?
Um, yes, tons of companies still use LeetCode to do interviews. I would say the companies that don't usually use LeetCode are just smaller companies, which makes it easier to apply to those and get those jobs, even though they're a little bit more, they could be more volatile compared to a more like, solid company that's been there for a few years. But yeah, LeetCode's very heavily used to do interviews.
Nice.
With AI, yeah, with regardless of AI.
And then have you provided like leak code problems like since you've interviewed a lot of folks, like do you administer your own leak code to them to see how well they do?
We do a little bit, not as much as some companies, I would say, but we have a few, and it always like kind of changes um, different algorithms. So I can't say there's one specific, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, there's a lot that we could go over.
Yeah. With Prem asks, what languages do you recommend is a must for this path? Prem, if could you specify like what do you mean for this path? Are you talking about like Alex's path with working with databases right now? And Prem is logging in from Chicago,
Yeah, are you like a front end path, a back end path,
like your job.
like my job? Okay,
Hmm.
so I do more of a infrastructure role. That's usually the umbrella I fall under department wise, which is back end. For myself, it's kind of the lead program right now or programming language right now is Golang. Uh, I love Golang. That's what I write in. Also, Python depends on it really depends on the company. It does change, but as long as you know, um, like either Java, Golang, sometimes C++, plus plus, those are kind of like the three. I would say those are the big three. But
Hmm.
Golang's like the new lovely one that a lot of companies are adopting. It's a lot easier to use. It's a
Right.
statically typed language versus a dynamically typed language like Python or JavaScript, which is very nice.
Thank you for sharing. Let's see here. Cameron also asks, I have a product management background and have been learning Python and SQL to level up my game. Would you say PMs with technical skills are seen favorably in your company slash interview process?
Absolutely. Um, I'd say it's a mixed bag on like again, I think all your skill sets come into play and it can be extremely valuable. Like I work closely with several technical program managers, what they're called in my company, and I think that is a pretty adopted term, but obviously other companies can use different titles. But technical program managers usually have like a more technical background. And especially for analytics, I think analytics managers or upper management in any analytics team or department, very sought after. So I would say they're very good skills. It's also nice. to be that manager that you can take on some work because people managing is like one skill set, and just to not be kind of keep your own life interesting and like kind of have something new day to day versus just doing like one-to-ones or something like that. Having that technical knowledge is very helpful.
It's hard to envision a product manager these days that doesn't have some kind of technical like understanding of like what they're building, especially too if they're interacting with engineers on a consistent basis, right? Also too, I think that having that at least some kind of technical background helps provide some if this is the right word, but like I would say like being able to empathize with like what the engineer is like going through in order to build whatever they need to build, because there's a lot of nuance with building things together as a team. But I could see, I don't think it could hurt at all. So next question here from Dustin. Dustin, if you haven't already, please let us know where you're zooming in from. Dustin notes. He is self-taught. What is your opinion on boot camps? Do they help you get through the HR maze over being self-taught?
Boot camps are extremely, I would say, boot camps are very valuable. I've had more of my friends who take boot camps get jobs pretty quickly than being self-taught, but a lot of the people I know who self-taught were like learning back in like 2013, about the same time I started learning. And that because I was getting to know people during those last 10 years. So, but boot camps, you can have certificates, and I think it's more favorable for hiring managers for sure.
Oh, really? Good to know. Also, too, I'm sure there's there's quite some variability with boot camps too, right? So depends on the boot camp, perhaps too. Let's see. Mehovel, please excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that. Do you have any advice for people who are changing careers in their mature years, 35 to 45 and over, and going into tech fields for the first time? Is there any ageism and how to handle that?
So the good thing about the tech sector is that um, there is no they try to be a lot of the companies try to be like a lot less prejudice or like a lot more open-ended, and they specifically have changed a lot of their applications like to be more open-ended by every standard you can possibly imagine. I'm trying to use the right terminology here. Um, so yeah, I think it's my husband's around the same age and he's learning how to code for the first time. I know a lot of people are in the same camp as you. Um, I wouldn't say there's much ageism, no. They try to make the applications where it's like, very broad so no one knows anything really, because that's the focus is like, do they fit the role?
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier too, right? Like about your personality and if you'd be like a good fit. I know when I hire people, it's like, can I imagine working with this person on a consistent basis? Will this person make my life easier? So, can this person contribute to the team? So, next question is from Jacob Stern, Arizona in the house. Jacob wrote, thanks for the tips. Other feeling out roles and technologies. I know the online landscape was different then, but you mentioned an interview reference. So, did you have a mentor or career guide you reflected with, and how did you establish a specific coding goal? And how did your coding goals evolve? So, a few questions in there, Alex, if you wanted to break it down one by one.
Okay, so I didn't have a mentor. One of the biggest reasons why I'm a really big advocate for people learning how to code themselves or taking a different path than having to go into like let's say a state school or something like that is because I had such a hard time starting myself at a really windy, very, very bad path because I had no one and there was very little resources online at the time. And it didn't really quite work the way a lot of coding programs were taught then didn't quite work with the way I learned personally. And so I didn't have those types of advantages. I just had a friend who worked in custops at the company Squarespace, and she just told me when they would open an office. And so it was kind of very word of mouth. And I was like, okay, cool. This is actually kind of aligning with what I'm needing. So it was more of like good timing, one of those situations. I now do have a mentor that I met through Squarespace who's helped me build the coding boot camp, and I've gotten a few out of that. But I have found other um, mentors through conferences and just asking people from previous companies I worked at that I really had a good time with, even if they weren't very technical. Um, they helped in other ways for my career that were, more logistical based. Um, how did establish a specific coding goal? Um, I guess timelines are, very independent on like what your schedule is currently or whatever. I would always pick different timelines based on whatever needs I had. Like if sticking to like an hour a day, like making it smaller and smaller was easier for me and I think was a really good win. Like I started off like doing 5 minutes and then I went to 10 minutes a day and then 30 minutes a day and then an hour a day. And I would try and do like, okay, if I can do 5 minutes for a week, then I move to 10 minutes for another week and then 30 minutes for 3 weeks and kind of grow from there. And I felt like that was more helpful for me. Sometimes during the curriculum, it would be more activity based if the curriculum was more like that, like exercise one, exercise two. I was like, okay, these exercises are really small. I'll do like 3 exercises in a day. That's like a half hour. And so I did feel like setting types of goalposts was very helpful.
Right. And
And
if
I
the
think that,
goal is too ambitious, then you can get really discouraged if you don't meet it, right? Uh,
yeah, a lot of
yeah.
dead code, a lot of unfinished projects, like thinking that I was able to build a server when I didn't really understand any fundamentals was a challenge and not a realistic goal. So for what I ended up doing that was extremely successful for myself was I retook classes over and over again. Um, Again, I took a tree house at the time. I didn't do Codecademy. It was like a year new or something like that. I just had Treehouse through my work. And then from there, I actually took a How to Learn Python the Hard Way class, which is a PDF. I had tried many different videos, many different books, and this PDF was what really, really helped me. And I just redid that entire exercise. Like it was like 50 exercises 3 times over, and things started to click. So retaking videos and rewatching things was very helpful.
Nice. Nice. Uh, okay, next up here, Cecilia, B. Cecilia, let us know what part of the world you're in. Oh, also from Oregon, my bad. Other than via search engines, where would you suggest searching for local tech conferences? Eventbrite, Meetup, etc.
Hi from Morgan. Um, Eventbrite and Meetup are great. I would say those are probably my biggest two. Otherwise, there's some like Linux conference and ones that I wouldn't have known um, that I just learned through other people in the engineering organization. And so, honestly, the other way I would find conferences once I found out I can go to them and found out that was like more of an opportunity after like trying to find meetups, I would just type it into Google and try and search what was local. And since I'm close to Seattle, like yourself, um, sometimes I would try and find whatever's happening there since it's a bigger city. And so just typing in conferences 2025, and then I would check, whatever was happening. And then I would find smaller companies from that. Like they had a conference, like a 2024 conference, and then I would try and see and follow up with that company later to see if they would have another conference in the next year or something like that. So that was how I would find company names because we all know the tech company names are just out of this world.
Hmm. I wonder if there's some opportunities too, like maybe on Reddit. Maybe there's like tech in Oregon or something like that. Side note, if you're interested in starting a club in Oregon, please let me know. We're trying to expand our city clubs. I would love to have someone in Oregon. Dennis writes, I sometimes join Get Nation conferences. If you live in a city with a convention center, you can try searching their calendar. If anything, I find it perplexity can help as well. Thanks for the tip, Dennis. Any other questions at all? If people are writing, oh, let's see here. Does Squarespace or other big companies use AI to comb through applications?
Yeah, yeah, this is a question. It depends on the team. Like for instance, my team, I can't really use AI. Everything I all the applications I use or the services I run um are too specific. Like I can get extremely general guidance on like I manage the database systems and a lot of those like answers I would already know by hand just from using the database after the first few times. Um I think some of our teams are more heavy AI users, but not most. It's a very taboo topic among the tech industry of like what is AI and what is not. I hear Salesforce or no, maybe it's a Shopify. I think it might be Shopify. I've heard a few companies are very big AI users. And I think it just boils down to the team and like what
Yeah.
tech stack you're actually working with and within that team.
It's pretty nuanced. Could be
Yes.
nuanced. Yes. Let's see here. Cameron writes again. Do you have any tips for handling imposter syndrome? Good topic. Common question, by the way.
Yes, very common. You know, confidence is very, yeah, it's like that self-doubt I was talking about, and it coincides with like confidence and just keep moving forward. Like anytime you're doing anything related to coding, like if you read a technical article like about a tech company, maybe you're like, a little burnt out on trying to like go and try and like get all the skill sets and be the fastest since it's like a really intense industry. It feels like, especially being on the outside of it, and I'm very familiar with those feelings. Just keep taking the classes, just keep going, just believe in yourself. I know it sounds like kind of silly, but the syndrome will slowly go away. Things will slowly click. Like you can't become a heart surgeon overnight. And I know that's like maybe not the best example, but you're not going to become a biologist within a year. You're going to learn these skill sets over a few years. And that was one of the things I learned that I thought I would be able to do this in a year. And you can learn to code in a year, especially with the tools that are out there today. But sometimes that's not for everyone. It worked against my brain. So just being really kind to yourself and knowing that it will make sense to you eventually. Like it will.
Just gotta stay consistent. Keep grinding. Keep grinding. Um, Lamano, please excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that. Do you have any recs for websites or job boards to find jobs?
Honestly, Reddit has probably been one of the best for me. Um, there's people out there who make the lists for you, and they have posted them on Reddit. You got to be a little bit specific, like software engineer jobs, remote, something list. You type in Reddit, and you can find some in there. Like for instance, Golang specific or like what type of language you're looking for is probably a good place to start. Otherwise, job boards, honestly, finding job like going through LinkedIn, finding people you know or you don't know, and just seeing who they are, what company, and just kind of let yourself fall through a rabbit hole and let yourself lead yourself. You'll find different companies, and then you can look up those companies and see what jobs are available. That's a really good way to find like random companies that you wouldn't necessarily find when you just Google a job.
That's
Yeah.
that's a great tip. Any other questions at all? If people are loading up questions, I have a question. So, you went from customer ops and you now work on databases. Do you see yourself going into any other, in a different space at all within the next few years here?
Um, I have a lot of management experience. I do like working with people, but I do like building things. So being a technical program manager or technical manager, I should say, not program manager, but technical manager, definitely fits the bill. Like, so growing in my career and specifically staying in like distributed systems, which is more back end focused, Kubernetes. But I really like the back end world. I kind of want to live here. I feel like there's usually two camps once you kind of figure it out. It's like people really like front end or they really like back end. If you're in data, awesome. Like even with AI, there's always going to be data analyst jobs. Like
Mhm.
always analyst jobs. They'll never go away.
Yeah, for sure. Now, because people use AI doesn't mean it's right too, right? So you gotta double check that. You gotta design your prompt, etc. So. Seems like there are no more questions. Alex, where is the best place if someone wants to get in contact with you? What's the best way to do that?
Probably LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Okay, cool. I will. I can post your LinkedIn to the event page after this. And if you have any other questions that come to mind, feel free to post them there or email or message Alex directly. So thank you so much for everyone coming today. Special shout out to Alex for taking the time to put together the deck, taking the time to answer all of these awesome questions. I know a lot of y'all are trying to either upskill or change careers within your company or try to get into an entirely new one. And all these small tidbits of information definitely help. Again, we will upload this video to YouTube so you can rewatch it and reabsorb any tidbits that you may have missed. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming. Alex, I hope you have a good rest of the week and chat with you all soon. All right. Talk to y'all later. Thank you. Bye bye.